Is Dottie Green, and each person, we're going to introduce the next person, and then that person is going to introduce themselves more fully. So, Dottie?
It is very commonly known that those towns or places where militarization of the police takes place, that the likelihood of people being killed increases, because the mindset is no longer about safety of the people. It is simply about safeguarding oneself, so that the idea is not to stop the situation or to de-escalate, but to escalate to death. And we do not want that as the standard for policing in our city, our state, or our country. So there are ways that people are looking at how do you stop militarization of the police. And many of have legislation going forth in an attempt to review those things. I do believe that there are lights at the tunnel, and that there are towns that may not have chosen not to pull in militarized equipment. And we commend those towns, we commend those cities, because they understand the vision to some extent. But some of the things that we want to restrict police from doing, we want to restrict them from using federal grant money to purchase military equipment. We want to ensure that, stop them from deploying armored vehicles and weapon crafts, drones, stingrays, camouflage uniforms, etc. And we want to ensure that using SWAT teams, that they don't use SWAT teams unless there is a true emergency situation or imminent threat to life, and high-ranking officers have given approval. This should not be done just in willy-nilly, as my grandmother would have said. It's important. It's also important to avoid conducting no-knock raids that are so problematic. Breonna Taylor is dead because of no-knock raid, which is a military tactic. We want to restrict accessing federal monies for purchasing military equipment if the department has been recently found to demonstrate a pattern or practice of discriminating policies. So many police units are discriminating, and we need to ensure that these weapons are not used as a way to threaten those brown and black and those people who are not in power. In addition, I do believe it's important that these restrictions, wherever possible, wherever agencies should seek to return to the military government any military equipment that they have already received. It's time to get rid of those things in our community. Demilitarization means service to the community and safety for the people of every community. Thank you. Our next speaker will be Dory Dumas, excuse me.
In a time of COVID, safety first. Good morning. I am Dory Dumas, President of the Greater New Haven branch of the NAACP, and I bring greetings on behalf of our branch. We are proud to stand with the Greater New Haven elders. We are proud that they have used their voice. Now, part of today, which we still need some work to do, is that we're trying to bring a diverse crowd. We need everybody at the table working on this, but we're proud and thankful that each of you found it important enough to want to come out today. So thank you for coming out. We're standing against racism and demanding action. The uprising, protests, and rallies we have been witnessing are a direct consequence of years of racism, bigotry, and violence against Black and brown people. The recent tragic deaths at the hands of the police have brought to the surface the rage and sorrow of Black people whose basic civil rights are denied daily. They have also been a catalyst to awaken our country. So our young people have been out here protesting. Today we have our elders using their voice. Men, women, blacks, whites, Asians, everybody coming together. We're crying out and saying, enough is enough. The time for change is now. But while we're protesting and we're rallying and demanding, we're keeping focus on redressing the institutional racism and moving towards bold action. So today, one of the things that I'm going to speak on that we're calling for, and the NAACP is standing with the elders and others, is we're calling for and we want implementation of citizen review boards with subpoena power for all surrounding police departments, not just New Haven, all surrounding police departments. And we don't want them to just be in place in name only and have no teeth and have no power. So what we're asking is that we want the civilian review boards to have real power, accountability, and authority. They need to be independent from the police departments, have adequate authority, proper access to records and witnesses, and the cooperation of the police chiefs, executives, officers, and other stakeholders. That's the only way it can be successful. The need to have public reporting and a robust community outreach and community input. We want the police commission to have objective oversight. So we don't want them to be yes men and yes people. We want them to have adequate objective oversight. We encourage the public, this is your part, to attend the meetings, to know what's going on, to hold them accountable. If we want this to be in place, then we have to be there every step of the way. But most importantly, if we want change, which we know it's coming now, we have to be a part of the process. And that means to vote, vote, and vote. Show up, turn out, and vote. I know we're registering people. You can do it online. We know that several of you here probably are registered voters. I'm going to assume that. But it's not enough just that you are voting. Make sure you reach out to 5 people you're not so sure will go out. Make sure everybody is using their voice, their vote, and we got to hold our local, our state, and our national officials accountable. We elect them, we get these policies in place, then we have to hold them accountable. So we're asking you, each of you, to be a part of that process. So today we're asking for accountability. We want to engage everyone and make sure that we vote and we turn up. Thank you. Next up, we'll have community activist Barbara Fair. She'll introduce herself and give you more information.
We have this phrase out there that everybody uses lately, we can't breathe. And for me, it's not just a little cliche. I generally cannot breathe a lot these days. And so for me to do these speak outs are always hard. So I'm gonna try my best to just read so I can keep my composure. But what made it especially hard today is turning on the TV, and the first thing I seen was a police officer in Philadelphia with his knee on somebody's neck. So, I mean, and they have a policy against it. So, you know, it's like, what do we do all this for? You pass the policy and police officers still feel that they can do exactly what they want to do, and with the powerful unions that they have, they can pretty much. So sometimes I get frustrated even having faith in this system doing anything right, changing anything, but I just refuse to give up trying. Obama's task force for 21st century policing established a set of actions to improve policing across the United States. A consultant produced a PERF report for New Haven. Neither seems to have followed much, which is why we continue to struggle with law enforcement and police unions who refuse to accept change in culture. One of the policies he came up with, he said, was law enforcement culture should embrace a guardian mindset as opposed to a warrior mindset to help build community trust and legitimacy. That's going to be big. How do we change from people who've been trained to kill to people who can be trained to have compassion and restraint? The Department of Justice, another recommendation, he said Department of Justice should develop a case study to provide examples of past injustices by law enforcement and provide that historical aspect to candidates as they enter the police academy so they can understand public feelings toward police in vulnerable communities. There are an organization, POST, which is Post Officer Standard of Training, that should be a state mandate. Every law enforcement agency should be mandated to follow those trainings because they train you to be the kind of professional that we look for in law enforcement. There's another commission on accreditation for law enforcement, and we have 19 of all the police agencies that we have in Connecticut. Only 19 are accredited. I think one of the things we might want to look at is how do we get police departments accredited, because under that organization they're truly a professional organization as opposed to what we have now. One of the problems that I've seen with the academy training is that they say it's so much like military training. So we actually can get veterans to become police officers very easily because they say the training is so similar. I think that's problematic because if you have someone who's come from war and then they come in and then they get a pass to come into our communities, they get to operate like they're still at war. And we've seen plenty of evidence of post-traumatic stress disorder occurring with people in military. So I really think it's really truly problematic to have them now as law enforcement or officers. I listened to the chief of police last night talk about the uptick in crime. The message was clear from him. It's a result of downsizing the police department. They talked about 100 less officers that they have on the street. Others said it's the people being released from prison. I just wish they would stop. Nothing reduces violence like opportunities, mental wellness, valuing of one's life and everyone else's life, hope for a future, meaning and purpose in life, and living in society where violence is not the appropriate response to conflict. More police is not the resolve. They're not the resolve. People returning from prison are generally broken people who have been hurt by being caged like an animal, people who've been abused and neglected, which is why correctional oversight and accountability is just as important as police accountability and oversight. Because we know that hurt people hurt people. So what we need as a resolve instead of police is take some of the money that's in the police budget, the millions that's in their budget, and put it toward independent social workers who can help these people heal. We also need to take police officers out of our schools. They say all the time they're not social workers. Okay, we get that. Then you don't need to be in the schools where you criminalize our children and have created a school to prison pipeline. Out of the schools if you're not social workers.
Yes.
Out of the psychiatric hospitals where people are there because they have mental illness And instead of understanding the behavior, you act as though they're criminals. And many of them get criminalized and harmed when they go to the hospital for psychiatric care. So come out of the hospitals where people are looking for care and be on the streets where you're supposed to be policing. That's what we talk about when we talk about defunding police. Everybody has a different tack on that, but for me, it's about, let's take some of that millions of dollars that we have in the police budget and instead put it in our communities as resources for our people. Social workers, independent social workers, not social workers inside of the police department, but independent social workers who truly are trained to have compassion and care and empathy. Those are the people that we need to be using some of those policing funds for. We're not crazy enough to say we don't need police, because we do on some level, but the level that we have, we don't need our communities over police, 3 and 4 communities policing our community. We don't need that. We need to address the issues that cause crime and violence. I looked at the bill last night, the 63-page bill about police accountability. It put me to sleep. I was exhausted by the time I finished reading all of it. 63 pages to talk about how do we get accountability for police and oversight and corrections. And by the way, corrections is mentioned in the bill already, so it's not a leak that when the session opens that we're not just talking about police accountability and oversight, but we're also talking about correctional oversight and accountability. That's not a big leap. Language is important. Use of words like may leaves the door open for subjective interpretation. Using the words reasonable or reasonably believe are other problematic language. We are leaving these interpretations up to people who thought it was reasonable to break the spine of Freddie Gray or to shoot Breonna Taylor while she slept in her bed, or 7-year-old Ayanna Stanley when she slept on the couch, or Eric Garner who got choked to death, or Sandra Bland who couldn't even ask, "Why are you bothering me?" without ending in jail, or Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old who couldn't play on the park with a toy gun without being shot and killed, or Jason Negron in Bridgeport, or Jose Cruz, or Mubarak Solomon who was just killed in West Haven. And with all these names that I name about the Connecticut ones, how our governor can say we don't have a policing problem in Connecticut, I don't know. Maybe from Greenwich you don't see that, but we definitely see it. And again, restricting chokeholds rather than ban them, they need to be banned. Putting your knee on somebody's neck needs to be banned. Those are not things that we should even think about needs to be done. If you need to do these kind of things, then maybe you don't have the physical capability of doing your job. So instead of killing people, why don't we get people in there that can do their job? Training. We're always talking about training. You can't train a person to love, to have brotherly love, compassion, empathy, and integrity. You can't train them to become humane if they lack humanity. You can't train a person who has received societal messages all of their lives since they were children that told them that brown-skinned people are a threat. The darker brown, the more threat. The more muscular, threat. The more outspoken, a threat. If you've been told all your life since you were a child that brown-skinned people are less than, a 4-hour training or a 4-day training would not erase those lifetime of messages. Another thing I've seen in the bill that was problematic, asking for a 5-year mental and physical well-being meaning assessment. 5 years? 5 years you wait to see if someone's still mentally ready to do their job? I think everybody, all police officers should have an annual wellness check, annually. And if they've been involved in excessive force, or shot someone, they should have an immediate one. And not only a mental health assessment, we need to have a drug screening, because that's one of the first things that happens when they kill somebody. We do a drug screening on the victim, but we don't drug screen the cop who pulled the trigger. So we need to look at that. And that needs to be annual and random. And finally, we need to know that this is not about George Floyd only. This is about countless people who have lost their lives, and even those who haven't lost their lives, who have just been abused inside the prisons and outside on the street. And we need for it to stop. One of the people that's here today, I see him, Alex Torben, who's actually running to be in the Senate. He's been fighting vigorously to get people released from prison in this COVID situation. This situation which people have been left to get sick and die, and nothing's been done to save their lives. It's almost like the message is, these people's lives are dispensable, so we're not going to do anything. California just recently announced releasing over 7,000 people to avoid COVID poisoning. We need to be thinking about that also here. And as I talked about Alex, he just filed something just yesterday, again, trying to get our governor to look at releasing people, safely releasing, not releasing every single prisoner, but safely releasing those people, like people within 60 days of a sentence. Like one young man has 60 days left in his sentence, and he has a blood clot in his lung and in his leg, and yet he's still sitting behind bars. There's a problem with that. So we need to think about how we can safely release people, I'll say within 6 months of their sentence. Let them go home. Hopefully no more infections will happen, or at least they'll be decreased. Because when we say social distancing is most important in keeping the spread of this virus, then we know that can't happen in prison. So we have to address that. Those lives inside matter just as much as the lives outside. And I'm leaving you with two signs that mean something to me. Coping with racism is exhausting. Let me tell you, it's truly exhausting. And to say that it's a public health issue, finally, 401 years. And then what next? We can't wait for your justice. We just can't. We've been waiting too long for real justice, a lifetime of waiting for justice, and I'm tired of waiting myself. So when you see things start exploding in Connecticut like they are across this state, don't look at the people and say, look at those animals. Say, those people are tired. They're tired of being abused and tortured all of their lives simply because they have brown skin. Thank you. And next we're going to call up Ms. Colleen Lord. One example of why correctional accountability and oversight is so desperately needed. So when they go back in special session, I want all of you guys to pressure your legislators. Tell them it's not can we do it, it's we have to do it. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Colleen Lord. This is my grief support puppy, Ruby. And this is my son, Robbie, who was killed 15 months ago, less than a mile from where I'm standing right now. If you don't know the story, thank you, dear. If you don't know the story of what happened to my son, he had a serious mental illness since he was very young. And after a few misdemeanors, the judge was wanting to drop the charges if he could be in a hospital for 3 months. and you cannot get in a hospital for 3 months, or almost any amount of time, unless you have a whole lot of money. We tried everything, but eventually my son had to serve a couple of months in jail at New Haven Correctional Center. The only thing that he was in there for at the time that he was killed was for pulling the fire alarm in a local emergency room here in frustration when he was refused help for the 40th time in less than 2 years of trying. So the way I see it, the broken mental health system and systemic racism and the lack of accountability are 3 prongs that all are joined and overlap together, that create the dehumanization of our loved ones, that create mass incarceration, that create a warrior mentality in the police, and that ultimately come together to bring about brutality. And there's not a lot of truth going on about what happens in the DOC. So my friend Barbara asked me to share some things that I've learned. My son was having a schizophrenic episode, partly due to him being denied his medication. Yeah. And he was laying down in the shower, calm, but he was in there too long, and he needed to come out per the lieutenant and the corrections officers. They sprayed an incredible amount of pepper spray directly into his face and mouth and skin. I've spoken to the creators and the makers of the pepper spray that they use, Saber Red, and I've asked, are there any safe levels? And they showed me studies where 1 second of spray is mostly tolerated after a half an hour. But the first spray was for 3 full seconds directly into his face, followed by a kick stomp into his face by an officer, followed immediately by another 1.5-second spray. The excruciating pain, this isn't like your regular mace, but the excruciating pain, it's created to go deep into your skin and burn you from the inside out, and it swells your mucous membranes, and it causes excruciating pain. And I know this because after 15 months, I was finally permitted to view the video, and I've seen the videotape of my son being killed. And I had no idea at the time, but I heard his last words because the situation had escalated and they ended up spraying him 4 times in 10 minutes and putting him into solitary confinement when he was supposed to be waiting for a mental health review. But his last words were unbelievably, "I can't breathe," as several very heavy officers held him down and restrained him into 5-point restraints because he was pretty fidgety, having been burned, and they just wanted him to stop moving. And well, they accomplished that. The abuses that I've seen with my own eyes in that videotape, and I would like the Judiciary Committee to also review it, as well as the Governor's Task Force on Police Accountability. I would like them to see with their own eyes what happened to my son. In the hopes that good people can finally make things better in the world. officer that was charged with criminal assault on my son, he was arrested 3 months ago, and his arraignment has been pushed out 5 times, understandably due to COVID, but we are still waiting for justice for my son. And by the way, assault is not near enough justice. But if that's all that we can get in advance of the new laws being passed, then justice to me would be for this to never happen again, for people to learn and to start treating each other. These are our loved ones. These are our family members. This really could happen to anybody. But we need to treat them with compassion and understanding and not judge them. People say they're criminals. Why should we fight for them? Well, this goes back to the systemic racism and the poverty and what has the social issues that have created the problems. And it goes back to the broken mental health system where the people are not getting treated and they're ending up in jail instead or homeless. And it goes back to there being no accountability for the officers who commit crimes. They are the offenders. I'll never call my son an offender in the DOC. He was an incarcerated person, and I'm sorry to say, but I've been convinced that many of the staff there are the real offenders.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.
I want to bring up Gary Winfield, Senator Gary Winfield, because he has to run off. So we want to get a few words from him since he's been aggressively fighting to get these laws passed.
Good morning. Sorry, I'm in the middle of a meeting actually talking about the bill. You all are the most important part at this point. We have a bill that we put forward for a draft. We're setting up for a public hearing where we need to hear, not from the people who normally show up to that public. Okay, I don't know because it feeds back to me. It sounds like it's loud. Is this better? Yes. All right. We need to hear not from just from the people who always show up to these hearings whenever we're trying to do something along the lines of police accountability, but from everybody who has been out in these streets talking about Black Lives Matter. This is the point where your advocacy is really going to make a difference. I think we all know, if you watched that press conference the other day, that even the people who were involved in the conversation about the bill came to the press conference and said, but I'm not necessarily going to vote for this bill. There are parts of this bill that they do not want to pass. The last section on qualified immunity. There are people who don't want the section on the FOI exemption being cleared up, and we could go on and on and on, and there will be a strong effort to undermine this bill. And so the effort to make sure that this bill actually happens has to be just as strong, and I would say even stronger. And so I'm here to first thank you for being here today, and to thank you in advance, I hope, for being there when that public hearing happens, because that is how we get this bill passed and get further along the lines of police accountability. But let me say this, to be clear, when that bill gets passed, there will still be work left to do. And the fight is going to require you to stay in it the way that Barbara stays in the fight. Thank you.